Today, I'm very lucky to have both Alex and Mike with me. I've had the pleasure of working with both of them in the last 18 months. I look up to them. I, get advice from them. I learn from them every day. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves, perhaps after I give a quick intro. I'm Patrick. I'm an environmental engineer by background. I'm very passionate about working with different sustainability leaders around the world on the different topics and challenges facing them on a day-to-day basis. I think in the next 10 years, the role of sustainability leaders will only grow from here. It's only going to get more and more complicated, more and more challenging. And I feel very grateful and lucky to be able to work with all of them around the world. Alex works for Putzmeister, a company whose vision is a world where housing and infrastructure are affordable and sustainable. So today we're very lucky to have Alex with us, who's going to talk a lot about the work he does on a day-to-day basis at Putzmeister. And Mike and I have had the pleasure of working together alongside many, many customers over the last year. And Mike leads sustainability at a premium consulting firm in the UK. It's a global firm. He's in the UK. But yeah, and that's me. Mike, do you want to maybe start with a quick intro?
Thank you, Patrick. And hello, everyone. My name is Mike Bascom. I lead the ESG and sustainability practice at Vantage Point. So Vantage Point is a UK headquartered but global consulting firm that does risk, we do finance transformation, and we do sustainability as well. And our approach to that has always been merging the technology and the advisory solutions to really make sure that clients have everything they need to handle modern sustainability. My background is very much from that sort of consulting background over a number of years. I've worked with the likes of Google, with Paramount, with Dentsu. I've had some nice big shiny logos over the years, doing everything from the bad old days, doing like the SBTI net zero pilot scheme at Dentsu, where we had to do everything in Excel. So incredibly glad solutions like Tricera exist these days, where we don't have to do that anymore. But right the way through to a lot of strategy work and designing Paramount's ESG work. Lots of different things like that, and been very, very grateful to meet people like Patrick, who are obviously spearheading that technology leading approach. So really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, my name is Alexander Diaz. Pleasure to talk to you today and to see the number of participants growing. It's a great day today because it's the first webinar we are hosting together with Tricera. Yes, I'm working for Putzmeister, concrete machining company. We're a global company and we have many products in different regions of the world. We are having this vision to have housing sustainable and affordable, which is very important nowadays. We are headquartered in Germany and housing prices are skyrocketing since decades. Yes, it will be a pleasure for me to share different ideas with Mike and Patrick today about the CSRD reporting. There's a lot of discussion around bureaucracy in Europe nowadays, especially the European Union states. Mike is out of that right now, but I assume as customers are global, he's also addressed by these discussions. And yes, I also hear that in the company, and I'm happy to discuss the pros and cons around it today. Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. And I'm very excited for this transparent, open conversation. I think we're going to kick off with a few questions, but please, for the audience out there, feel free to throw questions. Any question that comes to mind, we would love to answer it. I think towards the end, we're going to dedicate a few minutes to going through some of the questions and answering them. So we would really value your input here. And Alex absolutely agreed. I think CSRD is a massive challenge for companies. Companies of different sizes in Europe are being faced, and even around the world are being faced with this reporting requirement. And over the last few weeks, I think we've heard a lot about Omnibus, about the, Germany and France and different companies from different sizes talking about CSRD. So I'm excited to dig in and talk about that as well today. Perhaps the first question for you, Mike, I know you've worked with many, many companies around the world, different sizes as well, Fortune 500s, mid-cap, small and medium enterprises. In your opinion, why are companies underestimating the time and resources needed for CSRD compliance?
Thanks, Patrick. That's a great question to kick off with. And I think it's it is interesting seeing how almost universally there is this underestimation of just how big a task CSRD is. And I think that is fundamentally what has led the European Commission and everything to look at, the competitive compass, the results we've seen over the last few days, questioning things. But ultimately, the task is the task. And it's just a very, very big task. And I think the interesting thing from me and our perspective at Vantage Point is we deal primarily with finance teams. So one of my usual clients is a CFO, especially now that sustainability is moving into the Office of Finance. They're just not used to dealing with this new data landscape yet. So this is the first time round that auditability for ESG data has been so paramount. It's the first time they've had to think about double materiality in such a deep and meaningful way across companies' entire value chain. So there's a huge amount of work to be there. And it's just this evolution of the finance leader's role now includes sustainability. Traditionally, that data management aspect of things has been relatively straightforward. It's a good, well-established, well-governed, risk-free-ish process. I'm sure I'm making a lot of enemies of CFOs saying this is risk-free, but you know what I mean. But now CSRD's come along and just exploded this data landscape. They now have to do things like talk to the HR department to get gender bias. They have to be talking to the head of facilities to get kilowatt hours and electricity bills from an office in Taiwan. Like, this is all new to them. And I think you can look at CSRD and see all the ESRS topics. You can see the number of data points, but gathering those and leading a company through the process of CSRD is always bigger and more challenging in so many different ways. And obviously, as we've helped companies through this, from everything from double materiality assessments right the way through to reporting, and that sort of wonderfully messy middle bit in the middle, which I'm sure we'll talk about more in detail later. But it's hard to picture the whole sometimes. And I think when people can't do that, and that's naturally just because it's so new, you tend to underestimate just what a change management process this needs to be on top of everything else.
Absolutely, Mike. I loved your point about how like the big volume of data here and how nascent the space is. Like, my prediction is come 2030, this data is going to be more valuable than financial data. I know it's a bold statement, but we're working with an electronics company in the United States, a Fortune 500, and we are literally thinking about every single mineral they're buying, putting it on blockchain, going back all the way to the mines, creating a digital passport for every single SKU that they produce, allowing the consumer to be able to eventually scan and see all these data points. Today, consumers do not have access to these data points. So I think you're absolutely right. This is nascent and it's complicated, and it's an additional layer of work for CFOs or chief legal and compliance officers. And I love the insights there. Alex, I've worked with you for the last almost 18 months now, and I've seen the transition of Putzmeister from doing some of these data collection processes manually, slowly and gradually converting towards automating these data point collections, processing, enrichment. Would love to hear from you about the risks for companies out there continuing to rely on manual processes when it comes to data collection and processing.
Yeah, that's a very valid point, Patrick. You're going back to the time when we were starting to really build up the sustainability function. I joined Putzmeister 2019 as a head of governance, risk, and compliance. We built the function up, but the topics were not new to everybody in the organization. Audit, compliance, how internal control systems work, that's clear. But I jumped into the topic as a freshman. I didn't study it. Now people are studying sustainability. We have a lot of students coming to Germany, as Germany kicked it off quite early in universities. And for me, all these acronyms were just overwhelming. The topics and the different drivers in this sustainability field, they changed a lot. The regulation was not stable. Then we had to shift in different rules and how to put it in place. The legislation was was in a lot of areas still built up. Final decisions were not made. And we were looking out for a solution how to handle the massive data collection, like you mentioned. And 18 months ago, we had Dr. Klein in the team, an external consultant from a managing company who helped us doing a thorough research on the market. And we found a lot of tools who had a nice interface to key in data. But yeah, looking at more than 1,000 data points, not all figure-based, but many of them figure-based, we thought, no, that will not be a good idea to do it that way. So we were looking into the market, and happily, I can confirm it now. We found Tracera, and now we are much more digital. It will be a task that will not be payable by any company if you do it manually. And you have to interface the data that you have already and utilize it to the maximum. And yes, the finance functions play a role. I would say, yes, in the end, they have the result in their hands. The report will be published together with the financial figures. But a lot of the stuff is non-financial. You mentioned it, Mike. HR departments play a role. We have the facility managers who play a role. We are talking to a lot of production people in the organization. How can we, first of all, last month we collected a lot of stuff, and now we discuss the way forward, how to improve. And yes, managing these risks, the DMA sounds very theoretical, but in the end, it's traditional risk management, just for the environmental risks. And a lot of chances also, we found a lot of cost-saving opportunities. In one of our French entities, they shifted the lighting system to LEDs and adjusted their cooling and heating units, which are electrified, and they came down 40% with the energy consumption. It paid off in 15 months, this small investment, and these stories bring up the motivation in the entities to do something there. They don't see it as a bureaucratic burden. They also see their own benefits. I mean, reduction of costs is key during those unstable times.
Alex, I love your points. I guess maybe two things to reflect on. I loved your point around the cost reduction example. Another big, bold statement I'm going to make, 80% of EBITDA expansions for businesses in the next 10 years will come from sustainability initiatives. They just don't know it's called sustainability initiatives. I think people have an allergic reaction to names. You know, I live in the United States. People don't like 3 or 4-letter words anymore. So anything has an acronym or anything that you label, people have an allergic reaction to. But at the end of the day, if you go look at PE funds and all the transformation that they do, EBITDA expansions come and will come 80% from sustainability levers, whether it's circularity or rethinking your packaging or controlling the way you spend your energy. You know, all of it is going to, especially now with the rise of AI and data center consumption, I think being able to power those with renewable energy will save you millions and millions of dollars as a business. So great example. And I love your point about digitizing as well. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg now, but I really believe that the sooner you digitize, the faster and more effective decisions you can make. And that is really the real value. It's that value creation that comes from the data, the insights that is going to have in your data infrastructure once you've populated with data. And I'm excited to dig into that shortly. Mike, you work with many, many companies. I'm seeing a question from the audience here around the roadmap for successful compliance, but also what are the challenges that you've seen for companies that you've served in the last few years as it comes to their CSRD journey?
So, I mean, the challenges are always going to be unique to where your company's starting from. So I've got 2 clients currently working on CSRD right now amongst a pool of others, but they're an interesting comparison because on the one hand is an incredibly sustainably mature organization. They've had an in-house sustainability team for years. They've got an incredibly good carbon accounting setup. They know exactly what they're doing in terms of reporting. They've been dealing with their investor questions. Top level of sustainability corporate management. And their journey to CSRD is about evolution. It's about optimization. It's getting the technology in to create these repeatable efficiency gains that only technology can. It's about getting people like me in to really refine and build an operating model that works in the background so that you can get the data in a really manageable way. You've got your governance, your risk management, as Alex was talking about, all in place there. So that's kind of one version of things. On the other side, we're also working with another client, which is essentially going from 0 to 1 when it comes to sustainability, but they've also got to do CSRD. So it's not 0 to 1, it's 0 to 100. And they've got no time to do this. So you've got these sort of early adopters versus late adopters. And the challenges are they're completely different, but every company right now is having to overcome something. So if we take the kind of the early adopters, those who are more mature, it's about how do you do the change management process around things so that CSRD can do two things. One, it can just become part of your existing workflow. It becomes part of the BAU. Your finance team has the data, it's all ready to go, your investors are happy, you haven't caused disruption. But more importantly in that, and this ties back to the point you were just making, you're converting CSRD from a reporting burden to a strategic advantage. So they're looking to capture this data in a way so it's in the right place at the right time so that they can make future decisions around risk, about investments, about expansion, whatever that is, based on these new data points that CSRD is giving them. And obviously the double materiality process is the start of this. It's a brilliant cheat sheet almost to give you a strategy in terms of what does your company need to think about over the next 5 years? Well, here are the topics, which ones apply to you? On the other end, the more immature company, they're just having to do a little bit of everything at the same time. Like they're almost sort of stuck in this system where they don't really have a strategy, which means they don't understand their data requirements, which means they can't design an operating model that facilitates that data gathering, which means you can't build the technology correctly yet because you haven't got those parts, and that can't then feed into the strategy. So what we're trying to do is come in and do a little bit of everything, just get things going, like start the flywheel, because once all of those things start moving, they all help each other, right? They will actually create a positive sort of influence on each other. So the challenge for them is very much, well, let's do some really quick thinking, some really rapid iteration, which is where, you know, my team can come in and go, right, we're going to do a lot of workshops over the next 2 weeks. You're going to get really bored of seeing us. But by the end of this, we're going to have this sorted, this sorted, this sorted, and this sorted. Then we can build the technology. Then we can do this, then we can do this, and off we go. And then we can actually see that progression. So the challenges are numerous, but they will always be unique to your company, to your value chain, to your sustainability maturity.
Mike, I love that example, especially the point around DMA. For me, DMA should be labeled as strategy refresh. I mean, businesses, it's literally strategy 101. Like if, you know, steel of price is inflationary and it's 30% of your OPEX or CAPEX, well, you probably need to start thinking about how to redesign your products if it has a big impact on your EBITDA as a business, right? And just thinking very macro right now, but I'm sure there are 1,000 more examples for businesses. I actually would love to dig deeper. Maybe Alex, you know, let's turn away a bit from compliance and reporting into opportunity for reinvention. And would love to hear about how you at Putzmeister are leading the way with using some of that data or using DMA that we did with Dr. Klein, or doing, you know, some of the reporting burden that your organization is feeling, but turning it into value creation and creating opportunities for your customers, for your suppliers, for your stakeholders, for your employees. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, if you allow me, maybe one additional comment towards what Mike said. I mean, I feel myself, and I would say most of our colleagues would feel ourselves more in the second group of companies. We started off from 0 to 100. And the vision, when I took the position over from a colleague who worked on the topic in the beginning, was to create value for customers and the organization. And I was struggling with impatience of the top management because they see compliance as a must do, but let's do the things that really help the company. And if we help the customers, we will help the company. So I was lucky in one sense that we had a lot of cool products already, which had a very strong focus on sustainability because we started to electrify our products. Our concrete pumps are to a large extent truck mounted, and they were driving around with diesel. A lot of them are still. And on the construction side, the diesel of the truck will give the power to the pump. So we have CO2 emissions, we have other emissions from the truck, even on the truck construction side, and we have noise. And then we slowly shifted towards having electrified products in the job site to get rid of those emissions and also have the chance to turn off the truck on the trucks on the job sites. And now we are shifting. Next Bauma exhibition in Germany, in Munich, will show it to completely electrify even the truck mounted products. And we have also around that different products in different business units, which are already relatively sustainable, leading the market. That was the good aspect, but our global sales teams and also the customers were not on the same level. In some regions in the world, there's more discussion around sustainability, more adoption to sustainability in the businesses. In other, there's less. And having less CO2 emissions is just one aspect. So there's a lot of other stuff to consider. There's opportunities in understanding that the machine could run 24/7 if it's not noisy, even in the city centers and stuff like that. These are the elements which I would have loved to bring to the sales teams already at the beginning. But indeed, we were struggling putting strategic topics together and collecting the data, getting an understanding where are our risks, our opportunities, and the impacts. And yes, we saw indeed, while we went through the DMA and also looked into the data points, that we had a lot of good stuff to talk about. First of all, a very cool coincidence was that we found the first CO2 neutral entity in the group without really knowing it, because they just implemented more green electrical PV panels to fully cater the entity. It's Brazil. It's a small entity, but nevertheless, some of the entities already thought ahead, mainly because of cost reduction topics. But yes, sustainability was also a side effect, I would say. And it goes hand in hand, really. Cost, opportunities, if the customers, our customers, will see an opportunity in using more sustainable equipment and being more sustainable for the planet, we would sell them. If they don't, it will not work out. So yeah, it has to go hand in hand. It has to be a win-win situation that it really works.
Alex, I love that example. I specifically love also the example, like the mention of customers and sales teams. Would actually love to double click on that, Alex, if you don't mind. How does transparency when it comes to reporting play when it comes to building relationships with your customers, and how does it help you build trust with your customers today?
Yes, we had the first sustainability audit during my time last year. One of our key customers in a region where the focus on sustainability is very strong, bounced on our door and said, we want to have an audit with you. And we were in the midst of building up everything. And I thought, okay, interesting. Let's see what will happen. But yes, we walked through a lot of traditionally known topics like safety, safety of the production facility, safety of the products. But we also touched compliance elements in G of governance. It's a topic where not every company is fully equipped yet. So there we also did not have much to do. It was done already. And then we discussed a lot about the products. And by showing them what we do already and what we are planning to do, and them giving back feedback to us, what they really need and where they struggle with being more sustainable, it gave us a good way forward to talk to the engineering teams, what they can do in the future to cater these needs. Because if we don't help the customers, they will not fully utilize the potentials. And yes, it's a strategic discussion that we had on isolated job sites in the very north of Sweden, for example, where there's no electricity connection. How can they run electrified products there? How will it work? These very operational challenges, because they would love to do, but they currently see no realistic business case to do so.
That's awesome, Alex. Love the examples. Maybe before I jump to you, Mike, with a few more questions, I actually heard from Anastasia, our head of marketing, and we have people joining today from Germany, Austria, the UK, Scotland, Ireland, and Sweden, and a few states in the United States. So it's quite a global audience today. So yeah, and I can also see from the diversity of questions as well, which we will tackle shortly. Mike, I remember when I was with you in London, I think it was back in September or October, you gave me an amazing example of one of the companies that you were surveying and advising, and how they were able to identify cost savings and waste reduction initiatives, like, for example, stopping to send CDs with printers that they were selling. Would love to hear more about that. And I'm sure our audience would love to hear about that as well. But also other examples where companies have turned the burden of reporting into an opportunity for reinvention.
No problem. It's so that particular example is a good one, and there's another one that sort of links directly to what Alex was just speaking about there in terms of transparency. So what Alex was talking about was the external transparency almost. There's also an internal lens with this, and one of the many superpowers, if you like, that sustainability has is to galvanize people internally. Like, it makes you look at things in a fresh new light. It brings people together, and it forces people to look at things in a new way. And there was a great example of this where I was working with a large TV broadcaster, and we were creating their strategy, looking at their carbon footprint. And one of the things that we did was a lot of stakeholder interviews, and I got round to meeting their engineering team, and they ran these hugely energy intensive playout stations, which basically like beamed TV signals all around the world. And I was asking these guys, and I said, oh, what have you done so far for sustainability? Like, how far have you guys taken this? And like, oh, we've done nothing. What do you mean? Like, why are you talking to me about sustainability? I don't know. But we have created the world's most energy efficient playback center that has saved us 200 grand a year in electricity bills and reduced our carbon footprint by X. And it's like, that is sustainability. Like, what are you talking about? That's like the paradigm of sustainability improvement. But until you kind of open people's eyes, sometimes they don't bucket it into sustainability. And, the point that you made earlier, Patrick, it's like that 80% EBITDA change. We see that all the time, and people really don't, like, they underestimate what counts, if you like, for sustainability. And that CD example that you reference is a really good one, because it's on the face of it, it's the world's most boring story. It's coming straight out of the incredibly sexy world of printer resales and the B2B market for that. So it's a company that we worked with a few years ago who essentially sat right in the middle of a value chain. So they imported a lot of printers over from Japan, like direct from the manufacturers. They then placed them into large office buildings, right? So they got us in to do the pretty initially a very mandatory look at sustainability. We've got to do some reporting here, so we're going to need our footprint here, and eventually we did the carbon footprint for them, and we found this huge spike, and we just sort of started following the trail, really. And it ended up with us going to visit the warehouses because this carbon was just off the charts relative to what it should be. So we started interviewing people, and we're like, well, you know, why could this possibly be such a big spike coming from this kind of area? And it's like, well, I'm not sure, but it might have something to do with the skip outside. So again, we went outside, and there's literally just a skip full of CDs. So why do you? This is, you know, only a few years ago. Like, who uses CDs? But why have you got a skip full of CDs? You're a printer company. It's like, well, it's a bit weird because every time we get these printers from Japan, they sell us the B2C versions. They just send this individually wrapped printer, which has the installation CDs and the cables and like all this stuff you do immediately get rid of when you buy one. So we were able to then use this little insight to completely change the relationship this company had within the value chain. Because what we did is basically give them the material to go back up towards this Japanese manufacturer to say, hey, look, you guys are doing this all wrong. We can save you X amount of pounds in terms of shipping costs. We can save X amount of carbon from both of our carbon footprints. What you need to do is this. We can play the leading role. We can design a B2B version of this product. And instead of shipping all this individual junk with it, let's put 4 of them together in a box. We don't need CDs, we don't need cables, we just make it as minimal as possible, redesign the packaging. And suddenly they had just massively elevated themselves in the light of this Japanese manufacturer. So their business grew, they got bigger footprint, they got better deals, they got a better shipping rate, they reduced their carbon. It's win, 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 win all over the place. And all of this came about by just following the thread almost of this weird bit of insight that came out of engaging with sustainability. So you never really know where it's going to come from, but sustainability data will always create competitive advantage. Knowing more about your company in different ways will always give you that advantage, that create that asymmetry between you and your competitors. So whenever you can get information on how things work and how things run, of course, you can use it cleverly if you get it.
Mike, I love that example. And I think one theme that I heard from Alex and from you are like this win-win-win theme. And the reality is, I believe CSRD is all about finding that win-win-win-win across your community, your customers, your suppliers, your employees, the environment, right? I think at the end of the day, if you're a business making money but polluting a river, the river pollution has a cost to other people, right? And it all needs to be measured. So the third bold statement for today is I believe in capitalism. I believe in what I call multi-capitalism, which is a multi-dimensional way of redesigning capitalism as we see it today, where everything is measured, right? Like that river pollution, well, it has a cost. People at the bottom of that river are actually being impacted health-wise, and their life expectancy has a cost on the GDP growth. I mean, to the people that care about them as well. At the end of the day, everything should be measured. And I believe we're entering a world of this multidimensionality. And of course, some people are pushing back as well because it's scary, right? I think we're going to start learning insights that historically us as humans didn't have access to. So maybe actually one stakeholder group we didn't talk about much is the investor stakeholder group. I know Putzmeister is owned by Sany out of China. And Mike, I know you work a lot with private equity portcos. I would love to understand, maybe starting with you, Alex, in your perspective, how does CSRD today, as we know it, the data points that you're gathering on a day-to-day basis, how do they align with what investors are asking or what investors care about?
Yeah, we are in China stock listed, our mother company. So in China, there is already the requirement to have a sustainability report. and I've been recently asked about some elements to contribute towards it. We are in this year also working on having potentially more interaction regarding data collection. So that will be definitely an aspect. But from an investor's perspective, for us, we will use our investor, our mother company, and now to transfer our main factory, our headquarters, to net zero. We have launched a project. It's part of that wheel that Mike described. We are in the middle of finalizing the strategy, but already kicking off initial projects to implement the strategy, even though it's not finalized. And our mother company has a lot of elements to help us to become CO2 neutral. They are producing PV panels, they have battery packs, they have hydrolyzers, windmills. So we really want to use our investors' power to help us to be more sustainable. That is to some extent the pressure, because the time of execution and the expectations are different in Germany and in China. There's a different timeline usually behind it. The democratic discussions and pros and cons and back and forth between different stakeholders in the organization takes time. And in China, there's just a decision and it has to be executed. So that's the balance here. But we are now working on the execution plan and how to put it in place. So yeah, that's the main interaction with the investor. But yeah, definitely we have to come up with figures. So when we take over, for example, a Sani product and sell it in the market as a Putzmeister subsidiary of our mother company, we need to have the CO2 data. And ideally, it's not coming in an Excel spreadsheet. So yes, that will be one major element, data transfer, data exchange. But from a market perspective, I'm relaxed because our customers are not pushing too hard on us regarding sustainability. We are more in the pushing position towards the market to try out some products, to test it, to see the benefits. I've been visiting another company in the region, and they got requests from the supply chain that they have to have a carbon footprint for each of their parts that they sell, and are going to a machine, and the machine is consumed by Amazon. And Amazon is going down the supply chain and asking for the figures. I mean, we are not in that position, but yeah, it's also challenging, I would say. And I saw a question, what was the biggest challenge entering the sustainability position in the chat? I saw it. I mean, first, in the beginning, it was the massive new field that is still moving and developing to understand how it works. And for me, I'm by education a business administrative person. I have my MBA. I'm not a technical person, and now I have to be very much technical. I need to discuss energy sources, utilization of hydrogen with natural gas. What are the challenges? What can we do to calculate business cases for battery packs in the main factory? Can we do it? Do we want to invest in PV panel fields or not? What's the return on investment? The management will only go for it if we can convince them, and there are a lot of technical questions behind it. It's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Alex, thank you so much. Very, very powerful examples. And yeah, I think all of us are going to have to unlearn and learn as well in the next few years as this expands and becomes more part of the day-to-day business environment. Thank you. Mike, would love to hear from you as well. Like, I know you work with PE funds, PE portcos. Um, do you see a gap today in what these disclosures are asking for and what investors care about to make investment decisions or to measure the success and performance of previous investments they've made?
I think there's two elements to that kind of question to give a good answer. So one is there value created in doing something like a CSRD? And I think the answer to that is undoubtedly yes. And we sort of touched on a few ways of that. It creates the strategy. It gives you that information asymmetry where you can make better decision making. And then, but for investors, it's interesting. So they're trying to make a sensible investment that will make them money, right? That's the nature of their game. So what we're seeing a lot of is, despite the kind of anti-ESG rhetoric that's coming out, and obviously has intensified a lot with the US and Trump coming into power, and understandably, it's been a politicized term for a long time. Despite all of that, we're getting more and more pressure from investors to supply sustainably related information. So we're working with a company right now that's private equity owned. It's got a 2-year horizon, next liquidity event in 2 years where they're looking to sell again. So the exam question that I've been given ultimately is, how do I use sustainability to increase the value of our company within 2 years? Because that's what investors are looking for. They're saying, right, is this a more future-proof company than that one? And ultimately, like we can kind of get carried away sometimes with definitions and acronyms within sustainability. That's what it's primarily about. It's about creating future conditions for success, whether that's societal, planetary, whatever that is. With this case, it's business. And you're looking at, if I give you spend £100 on a company now, is it going to exist in 10 years? Is it doing its due diligence? Is it setting itself up for success by becoming more cost efficient, by avoiding climate and transition risk and physical risk and all these things that come with all these sort of things now? Is it able to satisfy bank loans? Can it provide enough information to get access to cheaper debt? All of these are the questions that investors are asking, and all of them are sustainability related. And that amount, and that is, it's just growing month by month almost, it feels. So yes, there's a huge part of that. But then there's also the mechanism of how something like, and you asked about private equity specifically, Patrick. So private equity is a great example of how underused sustainability data is. Like, I think these companies are leaving a huge amount of money on the table because of the way that these deals are structured. So what will typically happen is they'll come in, they'll do an initial valuation, they'll put together a plan on a page, a strategy, and say, well, you know, you should probably go for renewable energy. Great, thanks, I'll do that then. And then they leave the company for 2 years, 5 years, and then it's about time to exit. And it's like, right, what could, you know, let's polish everything up and make us look really sustainable. But there's this beautiful period in the middle of this, you know, the holding period within these deals where not enough's being done, not enough from a value creation perspective, not enough from a sustainable, just future-proofing perspective. There's so much that these companies could be improving and making more efficient and saving costs and attracting new customers, creating brand value, de-risking, increasing top line, bottom line, all these things that sustainability does. Yet there's not enough data being gathered at the front, and it's not being measured and managed throughout the process. And we've helped a lot of companies now, especially as sort of the private equity, sort of like central companies, when they look at these portcos, really act as that go-between, say, look, right, we're not just going to be one of these passive companies. Here are some tools to play with. Here's a technology we would recommend that you start onboarding straight away. Start building a strategy, and this is how you're going to measure it, right? This is the operating model that's going to do this. These are the KPIs that we're going to be asking you about every 6 months at worst, probably every month. Get on it, guys. And it's interesting to see that model now, because it's linked directly to value creation and the value of a company. Of course it's going to happen. So it's being mandated, and things are changing really quickly in that space.
Love that example, Mike. And yeah, totally agreed. I think, I love investing in real estate on the side. And in real estate is the oldest and probably most valuable asset class in the world. I think valued at like 230 trillion. I think we're going to see a massive, massive transition in wealth and like valuations over the next 15, 20 years because of climate change. I think people who say climate change does not exist, well, wake up and smell the coffee. Like, look at property insurance prices. I mean, look at places where you don't even have property insurance anymore. In the United States, unless you have property insurance, you cannot get a mortgage, which means that you cannot buy a house, which makes your house unsellable, which drives your property price down to zero. So, like, at the end of the day, like, if you don't see these correlations today, I think it's happening as we speak. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience. I'm going to choose a couple. A lot of questions around uncertainty, around European business becoming less competitive with these strict requirements. Very challenging questions. I'm actually going to start with you, Alex, with a challenging question, and then Mike, I'm gonna also ask you another one as well. Alex, one of the questions I'm reading is, how should my company start preparing for CSRD disclosure while there are so many changes in reporting requirements like Omnibus, specifically around like the uncertainty that it brings?
Yeah, I read this question as well. And yes, if you are not deep in the topic yet, it might frighten you a little bit. There's still a lot of movement in the legislation, and there might be even more pressure to change here and there. Yes, I mean, from my perspective, doing a DMA, finding out where are your focus areas to report on, that's an exercise that has to be done. There's no doubt about it. There can be a lot of standard risks and opportunities being used because it's no rocket science. But then always consider the main objective of the topic. The CSRD tries to bring transparency, of course, but at the same time it tries to support the industrial shift. But you don't have to be super accurate. I had discussions with my auditors already. They did a review on our DMA and our reporting points and gave us feedback. And there was also clear feedback that some of the topics will not be relevant in the first year. So we put them aside for now. And then for a lot of aspects where we are currently not able with minimum effort to get the absolutely correct figures, they tell us, go spend based in this area, do an estimate here. The only thing we want to see is that you looked at it, you made your mind, how did you come to the figures? Did you use public resources? Did you interview internal experts? Note it down and you're super fine with it. But use the transparency. Mike mentioned it with the printer company. Use the transparency to gain the cost saving opportunities. And if you are not globally connected in all departments, it will also foster internal communication amongst the different functions. And functions will talk to each other who never talk to each other. So you will have a lot of opportunities there. And we will pick them up now, opportunity by opportunity, based on the cost saving. How fast can we get our investment money back? And sometimes it's not even investment. It's just changing simple things in operation. Yeah, we got, after we initiated calls in the group on a regular basis and reported what we are doing currently internally and what's going on in the world, we had the request, please extend that session once and let's have a knowledge sharing amongst the entities. And they brought up ideas in production, how to move things differently, how to use, we have paint booths which consume a lot of energy for heating, that the paint dries, how to improve the process, and they brought up estimates how much energy they save, but they save costs. And these things we now leverage throughout the group and really make use of it.
Yeah.
And involve as many stakeholders in the organization as possible. One of the key stories of success would be to have all the departments who can contribute to figure collection, involve them, please, from the beginning. It's not only finance. There's HR, there's production, you have the facility managers. You might have a lot of departments where you don't know in the beginning that they play a role in it. You need to connect them and find the supporters for these topics. Some members in your organization might say, climate change, it's not true, this is all stupid, I will not do anything for it. But some will take this task over voluntarily because they privately fully convinced that this is the right way, and they are your supporters. Find them in the organization and bring them on board, and you will have a very good project.
Oh, thank you, Alex. And I actually would love to dig into that maybe after. Maybe let's take 2 more questions, and please keep throwing questions. We will make sure to keep time in the end to answer that. Maybe let's go through those 2 questions, and then we can quickly wrap up the conversation by focusing on the cross-functional collaboration that is required for these initiatives, as Alex pointed out. Mike, really challenging questions here. You're in the UK, so you're not in the EU, you're not in the US, you're somehow somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to ask you that question. Does CSRD risk making European businesses less competitive by imposing stricter requirements than international rivals with cheaper, less sustainable products? Any advice on how to solve this?
So I don't think I'm going to solve European competitiveness in one answer, but I'll at least give an opinion. So this is all going back to the Draghi report, looking at how competitive Europe is. Obviously, that's translating into this new conversation we're having about, is CSRD too complex? And I think there's a general misunderstanding and a misconception here that the number of data points isn't the metric of complexity. Okay, like people think, well, if we take 1,200 data points and reduce them to 500, then that's fine. We've fixed everything. That's not how any of this stuff works, and it's also not where the value is created. It's in the component parts. It's how you drive companies to set them up to get and manage and use ESG related data. And by doing that, you do what Alexander was sort of talking to. You create transparency and you create the flow of capital to more sustainable companies. But looking at it from that company perspective, it's about doing the DMA. That gives you that strategic insight. That's not dependent on how many data points CSRD currently has. It's about creating that operating model to facilitate and gather and manage that and bring in all those different stakeholders that we were just talking about. Again, none of that's actually related to how many data points. Like, yes, the total scope of the project will flex a little bit, but people are missing the point generally about this is actually an information game. And that's really what we guide our clients through. And it's why we find the CFO tends to be that primary person doing this, because you're trying to get that information where it didn't exist before and turn it into a strategic advantage. That's not dependent, again, on the number of specific data points. It's about setting your company up to get the data, have it in the right place at the right time, and then make good decisions out the back of it. Ultimately, coming back to that sort of competitiveness question, I think there is obviously this really keen push for deregulation right now because, again, led by the US, let's just let everyone go for it, drive capital, create, the VC world is going a bit ballistic right now. It's great. We're seeing these big bubbles everywhere. But of course, we've got the AI boom funneling everything. We've seen what happened with NVIDIA stock not long ago. Like, this is all quite fragile stuff. My personal opinion is that the EU and similarly countries that are adopting things like IFRS, so the UK, Singapore, Australia, light kind of thing, Canada, like the two main boxes of large scale sustainability regulatory reporting. If you're going down that route, you are setting your company, and more importantly, probably even that, the market up with better information to make more sustainable choices in the future. So you're naturally going to be de-risking that. You're going to be doing all the wonderful things that sustainability does at market scale. It's then on the market to try and incentivize that in the right way, though. And I think that's the missing part right now that Europe is trying to deal with. So I think creating the structures that provide the information is vital, and that's what these are doing, and CSRD especially is doing. Now it's up to the market to say, great, now that we know that X is more sustainable than Y, how do we make every part of the business flow support that more sustainable company, so we're rewarding it and forcing action again and again and again to become more sustainable? So it's going to be interesting to see the response around that, I think. But that's how I see this macro level stuff.
No, Mike, I love those points. I think one of the things that you mentioned that I think is worth resurfacing is the idea around decision making. I think if you don't know where to start by asking yourself or your executives, like, what decisions do you want to make to improve the business? And I think the decision science centricity is really important for focus and prioritization. Alex, another challenging question as well from the audience. I think I'm going to flip it around here. Like, for companies that, what are the risks that companies face by not getting started with their sustainability and compliance journey early on? Specifically, any guiding principles or tips on how to properly communicate the risks to the C-level team to get their buy-in for sustainability change?
Yeah, when I heard Mike talking about the European Union, I mean, we have to look at different industries where we are heavily relying on steel for our products, and steel production has carbon costs already by the law. So these industries who are in the focus area, or our industries, they are struggling a lot, but it's not the majority of the industry in the European Union. So I would answer, I'm not sure if somebody is coming from one of those corporations in the core, but most of them wouldn't be affected yet. They have no carbon costs from the certificates that they have to buy. But I mean, no matter if we have the regulation or not in the European Union, if you face a risk, you have to address it. You either mitigate it, you try to avoid it by not doing a business or moving to another region in the world because you're consistently flooded or whatever. You mentioned it. In some regions in the world, you don't get insurance. We have a company in Turkey which is very close to the area where they expect the big earthquake soon. It's just a time when it happens. We cannot cover the entire inventory and get insurance for it. It's too expensive. This is an outcome from the nature that has a direct impact on us. And we had to discuss whether we want to have this low coverage of the inventory and what we can do about it. Do we want to shift inventory or not? So yes, these questions, you have to think about potential risks and opportunities, impacts that you get. And if you find only one aspect that is business related and has the importance of C-level, you get them.
Absolutely.
I had the first DMA round with the finance people in the organization. And then they said, well, a lot of stuff is not relevant for me. I cannot contribute. And finally, all the regional heads joined in, and they very much contributed in these DMA sessions. They brought up opportunities. They said, in my region, I have this risk and this opportunity. I have a potential from the threat in the market here and there. The topics are usually there in the organization, but you have to bring them up. And DMA helps.
Absolutely, Alex. I think bringing the right people in the right room, providing them with the right context and framing the questions with the right set of examples and guiding the conversation is important. But I totally agree with you. I think the answer comes from within for the most part. And yeah, and I love the focus around DMA. I totally, again, agree. It's a strategy refresh, right? Like reporting or no reporting, like you should do it. I really think it helps. It will help you create a better strategy roadmap for your business over the coming 3 to 5 years. Another question around Omnibus. I'm tackling it because it seems our audience is really interested in this topic, so I want to make sure to cover it. The question, and I'm going to answer that one, and would love, obviously, to hear from you both if you have a different opinion. Could the Omnibus regulation with reduced reporting burdens for companies actually shift sustainability ESG back to its true purpose? That is shared strategic value creation rather than just reporting. I love that question. I think, maybe to give some context here, we work with companies all around the world. I think half of our customers are in North America, the other half are in the UK/Ireland/ the EU and Switzerland. And also we have companies from different sizes, right? Like there are companies that we work with, like a Fortune 500 in the Netherlands, in the electronic space. They have 26 full-time people doing CSRD reporting all around the world. Yeah, they have around, I think, 19,000 employees globally. And we have companies that I work with that have a fractional person doing it. So you can imagine the difference in kind of investments. And that's because of the size of companies, right? A 200 million euro provider of electrical wires based out of Italy doesn't have the same budget and resources like a 20 billion euro Fortune 500 company based out of, Europe. So in general, and when you say reducing reporting burdens, I've spent a big part of my career actually drafting regulations when I was living back in the Middle East for fuel economy standards, tire rolling resistance, regulating heavy duty vehicle import into Saudi Arabia. And I think the biggest principle of reporting and regulation should be fairness and across different companies, by phasing in, phasing out, by providing credits. It's actually a science more than it is an art. And I feel, based on my conversations over the last 24 months, that small and medium enterprises and some mid caps in Europe actually are facing a massive burden, and in most cases don't have enough resources to dedicate to this. And yes, it is putting pressure on their competitiveness as an EU-based company. I think the introduction of a mid cap, below 1.5 billion euro category actually is an important one, because today the way the CSRD is designed, it's basically treating a 20 billion euro company almost the same way as a 1 billion euro revenue company. Obviously, maybe the deadlines are different, but at the end of the day, the burden is the same. So I think creating a bit more, rethinking a bit more the framework, focusing it more on DMA and value creation, as Alex pointed out, I think could help, alleviate some of that burden. I do think that the focus should be value creation. So going back to what Mike said, what are the decisions that you need to make? What are levers you could pull as a company? What do my customers care about? What do my investors care about? What do my employees care about? Which is what the DMA really helps you do, and focusing your reporting, but more importantly, your decision making around that, I think is really important. And also going back to what Mike said, stop thinking of it as a reporting burden and think of it more as a insight surfacing, information gathering, data consolidation, because all of that data will become really important for your business going forward. So would love, obviously, Mike, Alex, if you have a different opinion, would love to hear it. And for the audience, keep sending questions. I think we're going to wrap up with one more topic, and then we can open it up for more questions towards the end. But before I do, I don't know, Mike or Alex, if you want to comment on that.
I think you're spot on. Like I think that CSRD is not a perfect vehicle for change. And I think we're at a point where we need to start refining it. So my point before, definitely I stand behind in terms of you got to create the foundations for that information flow. But if you can make that easier, and I think to your point, fairer is really important. Like you can't underestimate what companies are going to have to go through for this. So I think we opened up the conversation around that, and that is a difference for $1 billion, $250 million turnover company, $20 billion company, right? And I think there's the nuance in there that is right. And the nuance behind the question being asked, I think, is, are we spending too much time just reporting instead of actually making change? And I think if you do the reporting element correctly and you make it fair and you make it balanced and feasible, you create that advantage in a business context, and you therefore are rewarding companies who are more sustainable in that direction of flow of capital and everything else. So I don't see regulatory compliance as this pure cost complication it's not. There is definitely a camp of people that sort of don't see it as proper sustainability. I'm not one of those people. I think it's hugely valuable, but I think it is nuanced, and I think you have to get the balance right, and we're moving towards that. So it's great to see that the EU is moving so quickly on it, to be honest. Like, that's not a agile organization, to say the least, right? Like, that isn't. The amount of red tape that must have happened to get things as moving as quickly as they have is incredible. So to see the appetite to refine, to adapt, to grow, to evolve this regulatory world, I think is incredibly positive.
Yeah, maybe to add from my side, Patrick, this omnibus regulation addresses some of the pain points regarding timing, yes. But content-wise, it's not sufficient, I would say. Because when I look at one topic we didn't start yet, the EU taxonomy. After I digged into the topic, and it's not tax related, first of all, to understand what is eligible and what not, and which industries can only have 100%, and what's the outcome of those figures for us, as we are not relying on investors. Nobody's buying our stocks. The effort behind that and the benefit for us and also our stakeholders, as there are no direct investors. I mean, the banks can see our figures anyway, and they ask for a lot of sustainability stuff, but there is not much value from my perspective. And then we completed in Germany the Supply Chain Act. There will be the European version of it, which wants the companies to go down all their supply chain to, you mentioned it, Patrick, that you helped one organization in the States to do it, to the iron ore. I mean, that's having transparency on your suppliers is a big step already globally. And we did that with tools, but you need to finance those tools. You need to buy the license fees, maybe also consultants. And for a small organization, it's a big challenge. And then you have in the CSRD a lot of data points where there's not really a clear answer what is asked for. I'm participating in discussion rounds with one industry association for machines. It's a very big one in Germany, as we have a lot of machining companies. And for some data points, we have long discussions. What is the request? What is asked for? I mean, this cannot be true. When we look at financial figures, IFRS, sometimes there's also discussion with auditors about opinions, but very, very limited. And for the CSRD, we have big discussions about a lot of data points, and nobody really can give you the perfect answer maybe only the person who wrote it, if at all.
No, I think it's a really important point, and I think the audit element of things as well is still evolving too, right? Everyone is taking an audit first approach to CSRD, which I completely agree with. But I'm also, I've been talking to partners at the Big Four for months on this. They don't know how to audit this completely themselves. This is an evolving process from being the company going through this, to consultants leading those companies, to technology creating their efficiency around it, to auditing it. Like, all of this is new space. So I think as long as there's a mechanism for feedback and adjustment, we'll get to the right balance eventually. And out of that, I think that's where competitiveness will come.
Love that. I think the second big theme that I'm hearing is balance after the win-win-win, Mike. And I think that balance between reporting and because I do feel the pain of companies. Like, some companies are so overloaded with reporting requirements that they don't have time to think about value creation. I think that harmony and that integration in the approach is very, very important. So great. I think we have one last quick topic and maybe one last quick question for the day. Perhaps let me start with the topic. The topic is around the cross-functional collaboration required to get these, compliance and sustainability initiatives off the ground. I think you mentioned, Mike, finance. Alex, your background is in consulting and you have an MBA, but you also have been leading, governance, risk, and compliance at Putzmeister for the last few years. I work with a lot of chief legal and compliance officers. I think sustainability managers tend to be always at the center of it, but they have to wear so many hats, right? They have to wear communication hat, marketing, reporting, compliance, sales in some cases. You have to wear the finance hat, the legal hat. I mean, it is becoming such a broad and big role, and it's sometimes like hard to keep up. Maybe the one question I have under this topic is, how can different functions collaborate to get these initiatives off the ground? And what do you think should be the role of the sustainability manager or the person that is leading sustainability at that organization? Maybe Alex would love to start with your experience, given you've been leading this at Putzmeister for the last few years, and then Mike would love to hear your experience as well.
Yeah, I touched the topic a little bit when I discussed about the supporters in the organization and those who are not necessarily supporters because they don't think sustainability is at all a sustainable topic that will last long. These people are still there in the organizations. It doesn't matter where you go to. Yes, and I fully agree, Patrick. I'm preparing documents for our exhibition. So I'm dealing with marketing people. I'm dealing with legal because there's more and more regulation around what we can say and what we cannot say. And the technical topics I mentioned already. I mean, you have to have a very good project management skill to do it, because currently there's a lot of projects to be steered, and in a lot of cases you need to look out for the right people, because you don't know who's taking care of this topic yet. And I thought a lot of stuff regarding facility management would be with the facility team. Oh, but I realized, no, the quality team has the energy manager, and he has a lot of the information, and there's a system here and there. And yes, to bring them together and really build up the community, that's a big challenge. And I compare it a little bit with my compliance officer organization. They well established in every organization, in every entity in the world. I have a person who's dealing with compliance topics, and we are interacting regularly, and the knowledge is built up there. A lot of areas are well established, and how things should be going is clear. But you have to build it up here for a lot of the sustainable topics. Either they are not aware that it's sustainability that they deal with, or it's something that was not addressed yet. So yeah, it's quite a challenge, but it's super interesting. I mean, it's something new. It's not doing the same thing every day, and I really enjoy working on the sustainability area. It enriches every role, and you interact globally if your organization is globally. There's no other way to tackle it. And you have global, if you have organizations with global supply chains, it doesn't help to look at only one entity.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for that, Alex. Mike, would love to hear your perspective on this, perhaps maybe with an additional sub-question around the benefits of collaboration. Like, where do you see, like, how do you see getting such a diverse group together for the first time, tackling a problem from a new angle for the first time? And how do you see the positive benefits of doing that for organization, in addition to some of the challenges that you're seeing as well?
So I'll answer that slightly in reverse then. So I talked about that sort of galvanizing power that sustainability has earlier on, and it's such an easy thing to discount for companies, to ignore, but it's such a powerful force. And when you have a workforce that can coalesce around a topic that they care about, that they're passionate about, that people, and of course, to Alex's point, there are always going to be dissenters and people who don't believe in it. But what I'm finding, especially as you go down the generations, like every generation, this is becoming a bigger topic, a more important topic. People are voting with their wallets in terms of buying more sustainable companies. We've seen Patagonia and like sort of the rise of that side of things. But they're also voting with their careers, especially Gen Z. There's huge amounts of studies coming out about they are seeking companies that align with them in a purposeful way. They are following purpose. And companies that don't act on this are going to lose the talent war when the time comes. We're already seeing that in terms of talent acquisition and retention, and you can very easily and quickly convert that into pounds and pence. That sort of churn rate of younger companies, that ability to find the best quality talent wanting to work for you, keep them there for years, give them a career, give them a meaning, give them a purpose. You are producing people who will give you more per hour than unmotivated, quiet quitting contemporaries. So sustainability is immediately linked to a more efficient, more productive workforce. You're creating value straight away there. In terms of how you actually do it, I think the most useful answer I can give is really just see, like for CSRD specifically, I can say for two things that we have seen work really well from like the clients that we've helped through this. There are two key things that if you get it right, you create the conditions for that cross-function collaboration. The first is technology. So giving people a single source of truth, a foundational tech through which you can manage input, you can control governance, you can send tasks, you can do all the wonderful things that technology can do. You can share insights, you can create dashboards that motivate, and yada yada. You need a technology hub to manage your ESG data. Simple as. That can be an extension of a finance thing. It can be however you want to do it. There's numerous technologies, but I'm a big fan, of course, of Tracera. That's why I'm here. I think it's a great solution, and I know it can do all of these things. So having something like that is really key, because that's how you manage this at scale, and its ability to get the entire company involved. You're dealing with, again, that sort of office manager in Shanghai and the HR representative in Washington. It is your entire scale as a company times the amount of data points. It's a vast landscape of data that needs to be managed. So tech needs to be part of it. And the other side of that, if you see that as almost like, right, so that's what happens when you get the data. The question is then, how do you get the data? And for us, the biggest thing that we're doing right now is designing ESG specific operating models for companies. So we're enabling the conditions to get the data in a repeatable, efficient, manageable, risk-related, governance, audit-ready way that can then go into the systems. And so, and again, if you do those two things, you're covering both the elements. So people know what to do and know how to get the data, know where it's coming from, know who's in charge, know what technology needs to be done, automate all of that and coalesce it into one place. That's how you do this. It's the scale and complexity that CSRD demands.
No, Mike, very, very, very powerful examples. And yeah, I loved your vision around like investing in the tech early on. No, great stuff. I think this was a very powerful session. I think maybe we can take one more question from the audience and maybe wrap up with, a quick, vision setting type of question before we thank everyone and give everyone time back. The question from Sarah is, after a double materiality assessment, that is ESRS, what is the next thing they should get started on? Is it data collection? Is it value chain mapping? I think maybe, Alex, if you don't mind sharing from your experience at Putzmeister, how was the transition from a DMA into all the other activities that you've launched beyond that?
Yeah, we did two things parallelly, the scopes 1 and 2, and also scope 3 emission calculation and the data collection on it went anyway, because we wanted to have it. But then the data point selection and the arguments why to select data points and why not, put it in writing already when you go through in perfectly an experienced group of people. You don't need to involve everybody there. You have to have good arguments why to include something and why not based on your DMA. And then decide who should collect the data. And perfectly, you should have the functional representatives in these meetings.
Yeah.
If you go through E5, you need somebody who has production knowledge, who has an understanding of waste, of packaging, of circular economy topics. In S1, you need somebody from HR and potentially somebody from HSEQ who's taking care of safety topics. You need to bring them together and either tackle it in meetings all together that they learn from each other and understand the topic better, or do it in separate sessions and then send them out in their community. If they did not work globally yet, support them in doing it, reaching out to the colleagues in the world, and then step by step collect the data. Offer a helping hand all the time. And whenever they struggle and see a lot of effort behind figures or data, ask them to come back before they do it. Because otherwise you would ruin the motivation in those teams. Try to find pragmatic solutions in the beginning. And yes, if the tool that is used is fancy, they would love to work with it.
Thank you, Alex, for that.
Yeah, the entire exercise will be a boost for the digitalization in your organization. Don't forget that if you have a lot of stuff in a digital way already, and it's sitting in a few places where you can grab it easily and transfer the data in the sustainability area, it's a very powerful transformation tool in your organization. And then you will automatically talk to people who are in charge of digitalization. You will give them another argument why this and that topic is important and has to be on the priority list. Yeah, I want to focus this digitalization topic because it's so important for efficient processes.
Thank you, Alex, for that. I think one also point that Alex brought up that I think is worth highlighting is it's around the who. the sooner you can involve the data owners or the functional owners or business unit owners or different, leaders like the CFO, the better, because, it's really all about who. It's getting the right team together. And as the earlier you can get them involved, the better, and the more seamless the process and the transition becomes beyond your DMA. Yeah, but great question. Thank you, Sarah. Think we're almost out of time. Last question, maybe 30 seconds each. Mike, Alex. Mike, if you were to give one last piece of advice, in this, very highly tense geopolitical environment for everyone who joined us and everyone out there who will hopefully listen to this after the session, what would it be?
Recognize that sustainability is good for business. That is undoubtedly clear. You don't need to make the moral case for it. And usually if you try, it backfires in my experience. It's not a moralistic choice. We shouldn't be talking about you should do this because the real impetus and what has worked most effectively for me in trying to create the most amount of sustainable change over my career is recognizing that business element. Like sustainability will improve your top line, bottom line, and your risk management. That's usually the magic combination that senior leaders in business want to hear. If you can prove that, and it's not always straightforward to do so, but there are always ways, and there's a great phrase called submerged value. It's recognizing where these cost savings add up. It's finding all the parts of the puzzle and just creating this amazingly clear picture where suddenly people recognize, oh yeah, that is sustainability. And just with that as well, don't be afraid to not call it sustainability. I spend a lot of my time not using ESG, not saying consulting or advisory, because a lot of people don't like those words. My concern is the impact and the change that we're trying to make. If you want to you can call that whatever you want, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. But if we're making progress in the right direction, that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike. Alex, would love to hear also your last words of wisdom for this group.
I mean, take the reporting requirements and the compliance easy. Try to be pragmatic in everything you do. Talk to the stakeholders like the auditors to get a double check on the things that you do, and you have some comfort around it and you get the assurance later on. And then from business perspective, I mean, now when you started the journey and you have collected the data and you think about the strategy, it's the part of the company strategy. So if you think top line, for us, it's our sustainable products, and we want that they are successful for our own sake and the environmental sake. And yes, P&L wise, cost saving and the investments for measures, we will just put the business case on top of all the other potential business cases. And if a PV panel in the factory in Brazil pays out in 15 months, please bring me a better business case to invest the money, and we do it. I mean, it's just that simple. And if the business case is not ready in one region, we put it back on the other pile and look at it later. Maybe it's ready in region A now and in region B another time. So yes, and then step by step, everybody should go. Having the plan for being net zero already, scopes 1, 2, and 3 right now, nobody has it. So don't think about it right now. The journey is the objective. Start walking it and collect the chances, the opportunities that you get. They are there, and they would convince anybody.
Amazing.
I'm fully behind that. And yes, I'm happy that we choose the strategy already, our group vision, before I got into the position. But yes, it's very powerful, and to be part of it, It's just great.
No, love that, Alex. No, this was great. I know we're a bit over time, but this was a great session. Like Alex, Mike, I learned so much from this. Thank you both so much for making the time.